Welcome to Stories from the Center of the Universe, the podcast about the human experience.
Weldon, Bradshaw, welcome to the Center of the Universe.
Thanks so much for including me in this project of yours here. I'm honored.
Did I tell you who connected us? Did we talk about that?
Courtney Farrell.
Yeah, Courtney Farrell. She is one of the best human beings on earth. So you highly recommended. And she said you probably know more about Richmond area sports than anybody.
Well, I've been around a long time, and when you say center of the universe, the first thought that comes to mind is Jay Pace.
Yes, you and I both knew Jay. He died way too young.
He did, and he was one of my mentors along the way. I learned a lot about sports writing and life from Jay Pace. We go back to 1970, honestly.
Yeah, I think I told you we went to his 1979 leading into 1980 New Year's Eve party, and our house was robbed along with a couple other houses. We're not sure if our house was robbed in the 70s or the 80s, but we were at Jay Pace's party. Cool. Well, Weldon, you and I have some connection in that you've been at collegiate for a while. I went to St. Christopher's in the 80s. That was a pretty fierce rivalry when you're a teenager, and you tend to mellow out as you get older. You realize that while sports are beautiful and important, and you and I love covering them and talking about them, but the really good stuff are those human interest stories that you learn by getting to know people that either coach, play, or administer those sports.
Right.
Yeah. So what are you doing these days? Let's start there.
Well, I'm retired. I retired 2 years ago after 50 years at collegiate. But I have found that cliche, of course, but I wonder when I had time to work. I've stayed very, very busy. The director of communications at collegiate in 2001 had this idea that she wanted a column on the website and asked me to write it. It's called Reflections. The charge was it reflects the soul of collegiate school. And I've written a ton of those. When I retired, I just kept going at it. I've done an enormous amount of freelancing for the Times-Dispatch, just basically covering high school athletic events. I love the high school scene and, a few features here and there. But, so I've stayed busy and do a lot of volunteer work at the VCU Medical Center with organ transplant patients because I am one.
Yeah, we're definitely going to talk about your experience with the transplant, what led to that. But 50 years at collegiate, and you're not from the Richmond area originally. You grew up in Tidewater, right?
I grew up in Norfolk, went to Norfolk Academy. My parents, they sent me there in the 6th grade, and I think that they decided that it was either bite the bullet and pay tuition to a private school or come visit me up at Beaumont, up in Powhatan County, the reform school. And, I say that kind of jokingly, and they're both gone now. And, but they would deny all that because I've cleaned up a lot better in my adult life than I did at the time. But we played against collegiate, and, I've had a lot of chance as an athlete to sit on the sideline or stand on the sideline because I wasn't very good at it, and watch collegiate. And I admired them when I was at U of R. Got a part-time job out at collegiate coaching what we now call Cub Sports, middle school sports, and did that for a couple of years. And, after working for the Old News Leader a couple of years out of college, just had this idea I wanted to save the world and get that out of my system. So collegiate was not too picky at the time. They hired me and I was going to do it 2 or 3 years and go back to the paper, but I didn't leave the paper without the understanding that I would freelance. And 50 years later, I have a little bit more time to cover sports for them.
So you spent 5 decades at both places in either a full-time capacity or as a freelancer or a part-timer.
Well, I was figuring I've done 55 school years out of the last 56 at collegiate in some capacity. and then that football will, for the paper, will be my 55th school year, 55th football season. Basketball will be 56. I started basketball before. So I've done them both a lot. And thankfully, my wife, whose name is Emily, was very understanding. And, you know, I've written about how great she was about it, and how the Friday nights that belonged to the Times-Dispatch and the Saturdays that belonged to Collegiate, she just put up with it. And we dated a year before we got married, and we'd both been married before, and she kind of saw what it was about and was fine with it. So, you know, couldn't have done it without her. She's awesome.
You mentioned football and basketball. I know you're heavy into those two sports, and those two are, I would argue, still the most popular in this country and certainly in this area. Right. Did you cover other sports?
I've covered a little bit of wrestling back at one time. I actually covered a gymnastics regional championship. I know nothing about gymnastics. Asked enough questions of a couple of people, and actually, after I had written it, I got a call from one of them. This is before email, that said, if we didn't know better, we would think you actually knew what you were talking about. So I took that as a compliment, backhanded maybe, but it was a compliment. Covered some soccer, covered track and field, covered cross country, and you know, cross country and track are what I coach mostly. And you know, so you know, hopefully I've had enough range that hopefully I've done justice to it.
Yeah, when you and I were talking a few weeks ago, you had talked about your love of football and basketball, to the point that you coached at the 8th grade level, the Cub level for collegiate. We called it Bulldogs at St. Christopher's. Yeah. And I think you may have coached against the team that I played on in 8th grade.
I think so. And I actually looked back after we talked in my basketball scorebooks and did coach against you back then.
And I don't remember who won. Collegiate usually beat us in basketball, so I'm sure we lost to them when I was in 8th grade too.
I don't know that I remember from looking back, but it really doesn't. You know, time passes, and it really doesn't matter. It's you know, what a cliche, but the relationships, the friendships, and you know, the thing that I've found as time has gone on, my best friends in coaching are the people that are my collegiate colleagues, but I can look at people at St. Christopher's, Woodbury, Benedictine, Trinity, Norfolk Academy. It's all really good friends. You know, we're in it for the same reason. Just do right by the kids. And yeah, we want to win, and it's really cool to win. But you know, when end of the day, we're all friends. And
yeah,
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, Weldon.
No, the rivalries are there, but for the most part, they end when the meet, the game, the match, whatever is over with.
Yeah, I mean, in the moment, you're competing, you're striving to win, but over the long haul, it is about the relationships. I totally agree with you.
Yeah, I coached against coached boys and girls cross country and track for a long time, and there's a guy named Dave Bloor, now retired, that coached at St. Catherine's for years, and we are very close friends. We were then, we are now, and we had times when we would compete, and then maybe not so much that day because we had to get our teams back to where they were going, but maybe over the weekend, we and our wives would meet and have dinner, and our wives were both lower school people, elementary people, and they talk about what they want to talk about, and we talk about splits and workouts and things like that they had no interest in. And but I don't know how many times in the big time you have coaches that compete very hard against each other that have dinner together. Maybe you do. Yeah.
No, I think that's probably rare. Back in the 70s, 80s, and probably rare today. But I don't have a real sense of it. So you've been covering Richmond sports for, as we established, about as long as I've been alive, Weldon. And what would you say has changed? Not for the better or for the worse, but just generally what's changed over that time frame?
Really good question. I think I'm I have a love-hate relationship with football. I played in high school. I wasn't very good at it. I did more watching, but I've joked that I loved football except for two things: hitting and getting hit. And I got hit on the sideline at a game at Freeman, 4 or 5 years ago, right before COVID. I just didn't get out of the way and hit the turf and slid and knocked me over. And I was fine, sore, some bumps and bruises. But I joked that I got more action that game than I did my whole senior year. But I think what has changed for the better is the attention to head injuries. And, in the early days, there may be a rescue squad there, but somebody gets hurt. I've seen coaches, this is way back, run out with the ammonia packet, break it, rub it in front of the guy's nose. He, kind of jumps up and goes about his business. Now the concussion protocol, all that, I think it's so much in the news. We have to be so mindful of head injuries, and not just the moment, but the long-term effect of them. I think there are enough stories out there of, I hope kids now profit from the attention to head injuries and the trainers being very much sticklers for the concussion protocol, not letting them back in action until they're ready to go. The game is much more exciting than it was back when I started doing this. Back then, it was the three in a cloud of dust. Now, sometimes the hurry up. I got to, scramble to keep up with the play-by-play. In stats, I like to be on the sideline. I can see the game and I can feel the game better, unless I happen to really feel it. But knock on wood, that won't happen again. So the game moves faster. It's more diverse. It's more exciting than it was back then.
One of the other things that I think has changed, and I'd love to get your perspective here, is kids were encouraged to play at least 3 sports a year, at least in the environment I was in. And now there are kids that play a lot of sports, but there seem to be a lot more kids that are being super specialized in one thing 11 and a half months out of the year.
Yeah. Yeah. And, we see that at collegiate, and I see that, out kids that play baseball and travel baseball all year, or basketball, and then AAU the rest of the year, that kind of thing. But I think, and I don't have anything to statistics in front of me to quote you on, but, being a track coach, I've seen things about how, guys that play football and are recruited, coaches like it when they run track, because it helps speed, it helps agility, all the things that track does for you. So, I think we're in the world of specialization. Is it good or bad? I don't know, but that's where it is. But I think if all you're doing is getting ready to play 11 or 12 games a year, back in the old days, you just went from one season to the next. And, whether athletes were as good back then as they are now, I don't know. But I don't know whether that answers your question or not.
No, it does. So I have to ask this question, Weldon, because you watch so many high school football games. Is there one athlete at any position on the football field that you're like, wow, that may be the most incredible football player I've ever seen at the age of 17, 18? Does anybody pop out for you?
We're looking at 55 years here, so that's hard to do. So I guess I'm going to answer your question, but not answer your question. I'm looking for that, but what I'm looking for is kind of the behind the scenes. Like at the end of this would have been during the summer, at the end of the school year, each of us had covered high school sports, wrote for the paper something about our highlights for the year. And I didn't write about championship. I covered championship games or meets in 4 different sports throughout the year. But what I wrote about, and this is what impresses me, is how gracious athletes are when it doesn't go their way. I've talked about it in there. A young woman named Lainey Grant, who played basketball at James River, who may be the best female basketball player, at least one of the top 3 or 4 I've ever seen here. She's going to Carolina and I've seen her play since she was a freshman. And they got beat in the state championship game. She scored 40 points against Princess Anne, which has won like 13 straight. Nobody scores 40 against Princess Anne, but she did. But afterwards, she was very gracious. You know, she said, that hurts, but I love my teammates and all this. And that's what I'm really looking for. I mean, the athletic ability is great. It's in the moment, but you know, it's more who the person is. And this is what I was trained as a young sports writer. It's you're looking for the story behind the story, not just what happens. You know, I could do better kind of picking who I think is really good right now. It's hard to look back over all those years, and I guarantee I won't get it right. And the obvious answer, I'd love to say Russell Wilson, our guy, who plays for the Steelers now, and he's one of them. But there've been a lot of good athletes along the way that I've seen, and some of them are tackles, some of them are ends, and you know, some of them are quarterbacks and running backs, the guys we write about.
Yeah. All right. So the story behind the athlete, are there one or two stories that stand out that could be over your time covering sports, or can be the last maybe couple of years? Any stories stand out?
What I wrote about this is athletes and coaches too, because I'm watching coaches too. And as a coach for many, many years, you learn to, you know, I mean, no matter what you convey, you get beat, it hurts. You win, you're really happy. And how do you handle it and all that? And one of the things I wrote about was a guy named Lauren Johnson, who's, and this was this particular article, who's the football coach at Highland Springs, who has been ultra successful and a really good guy and very media savvy, but he is a guy who the kids play the right way. And I covered them in the state Class 6 championship up at UVA. They're playing Freedom from Woodbridge, and Highland Springs got behind 28-0. And that's a pretty deep hole to be in, even if you are Highland Springs, because you're playing a team that's, you know, the defending state champion. And Highland Springs battled back, and it looked like they had their chances, and they got beat by 8. It was like 42-34. Well, TV guy and I had a tight deadline. They had a press conference. We weren't supposed to talk to them on the field, but we had a tight deadline, and we did. And so Lauren had about maybe 2 minutes to collect his thoughts, get his guys, you know, do what coaches do with guys who are heartbroken. And so here's a guy with a camera and me with a recorder, and he couldn't have been more gracious. And he said all the right things, and we played to win, but they played a little bit better. We had our chances. All, you know, sounded like cliches, but to me, it came out as being very classy, very gracious. And I really appreciate that. You know, it's hard to do when you're very, very disappointed. So that's the kind of thing that I'm looking for.
Yeah, that composure's pretty unusual, right?
Yeah. I wish as a young coach I'd been better at that, to be honest with you. You know, you learn as you go along, but you put things in better perspective. But and I talked to a couple of its players afterwards. Another situation, I covered Manchester in the Class 6A, I believe it was. It was the regional semifinals in basketball. So the winner goes on, the loser gets beat, and Manchester gets beat on a shot at the buzzer. And, you know, they had the game won, and it was Lansdowne from Virginia Beach. And I told the Manchester coach, win or lose, I need to write about y'all. You're all a local angle. He was fine with that. So gave him a chance to talk to his kids. And then he came out and brought us 3 captains who were all seniors. And, you know, I mean, there were tears and all this, but what they had to say was just, it's a game. We played as hard as we could. It didn't go our way. We have to understand that and grow from it. That was the theme of it. And I'm thinking for 17, 18-year-old kids whose career is over by a shot at the buzzer or a fluke, how classy is that? So, you know, the shot at the buzzer to win is exciting, but that kind of response, I see the heart of the kid more than, when he does something spectacular that will be in headlines the next day.
Yeah, and that's going to be with them hopefully the rest of their lives. That sort of composure and grace.
Well, and you hope so, and I think the fact that I've joked along the way, am I a coach who writes sports or a sports writer who happens to coach? And it's like growing up, my favorite sport was whatever was in season. So if I'm a sports writer, that's my favorite thing to do. If I'm coaching, then that's my favorite thing to do. But I think that, with the sports writing, I don't ever tell a coach, I know how you feel. I understand how you feel, because I don't. But pretty much any feeling they're going to have, I've experienced somewhere along the way. And sometimes it's just a matter of being tactful, giving them more time with their team and letting them collect their thoughts. And then if they do say something that's, that doesn't come out right, be very smart about what you put in the paper. I've had times when I've turned the recorder off and said, do you really want to see that in the paper tomorrow? Does your principal want to see that? And, and usually it's, okay, I got it. And, but I'm, just want to do right by them and realize that they're in a tough spot. It's an emotional situation, win or lose.
Yeah. You're not playing gotcha journalism. You're not trying to stir up controversy to sell more papers. You're trying to legitimately tell what you saw, and that includes what happened on the court of the field and what you see and hear before and after the games as well.
Yeah, there was a radio guy in Richmond years ago named Frank Soden, who I had a tremendous amount of respect for him. And when I was at U of R, I loved being in the press box at City Stadium in the old arena and listening to him, do radio. And one time I asked him, what's he doing? I had this idea I wanted to be in radio. And if you've listened to me here, you know why it's good that I'm through print, but anyway, he said, what I'm trying to do is make the listener see what I see, hear what I hear. And it's like the light bulb went on. That's what I want to do. So in the space that I have, I want to try to bring the reader in, make the reader have a flavor of what I'm seeing.
I imagine you've told a lot of stories or reported on a lot of stories where the athlete has come from really hard scrabble beginnings and really made something of themselves. And knowing you a little bit now, Weldon, I imagine when I say made something of themselves, that includes athletically because you're covering sports, but it also means things outside of the sporting world. You have a couple of those stories that you're fond of?
Yeah. I'd have to think on that one. What I get a lot of joy out of is seeing some of these kids that I see as playing on the JV before the varsity game in basketball. And then, they come back and they're coaching somewhere. And, obviously something a coach has said to them or just the mentoring they got from the coach makes them want to do what the coach did because coaching is not easy. I mean, coaching is really fun, but it's not easy. And, it's time consuming, time intensive, and very often you put much more pressure on yourself than you need to. So, as far I would have to really, that work well spontaneously, but nothing comes to mind immediately except just seeing guys on sidelines or women on sidelines that I saw play 20 years before.
Yeah, and now they're coaching and impacting young kids. Yeah, and by the way, coaching at the high school level, I've never done it, but I imagine, but I know what it's like to be a teenager. I've raised kids that are now beyond their teenage years. That's a weird time in the kids' lives, and you as the coach, you're not only spending a ton of time doing this, it's sort of this grinding existence, and then you have kids. Some are extremely well behaved, but others have some things going on that maybe are causing some behavior challenges, and you're dealing with that as well as trying to coach a sporting team. Yeah,
sometimes the X's and O's are the least important thing you do in your coaching hearts and minds, and it's just that's really part of it. In my early days of coaching at collegiate, this is more the 8th grade stuff because that's what I did for the first 3 or 4 years, football, basketball, and baseball. Not that I really played much baseball, but they needed a warm body, and, I could throw batting practice, and didn't try to get too cute with, strategy or anything, but, I wanted to win. It was very important to win. And, I probably was doing a lot of for the wrong reasons. But I had the mentors that were telling me otherwise. Eventually it worked through my thick skull and figured to honor those mentors. You're trying to win, but you're also trying to build character. Cliche there, of course, but it's really a matter of coaching hearts and mind. And as I look back over 48 seasons of being a head varsity coach in 3 different sports, and many, many more seasons of being an assistant, I can quote you times, and I can quote you a little bit of record and all that and where we finished, but it's more, the fun we had on the bus trip to Woodbury, or, when, with the team I had in the late 70s, when we just had guys cross country, stopping at a McDonald's in Warrenton on the way back from Randolph-Macon Academy on a cold Friday night, and, late October. And we were, kids that never go to McDonald's now, but we were standing in line. I looked around, all of them were barefoot standing there in McDonald's. And, it was like, and these guys are in their early 60s now. So, but just things like that make me smile. And that was more to, just messing with me, or, there's a million of those stories. But again, it's just, the championships I've been part of, either as a head coach or an assistant, are really sweet. But again, what a cliche, but it's the connections, the relationships, and, running into them when they have children at collegiate, or occasionally I'll run into somebody at the Y who recognized me when I saw them. They were wearing a uniform with a number on it. And, are you that sports writer? I've had that happen. So that's rewarding.
I'm going to bounce back to your early days before you came to Richmond. What was it like growing up in Norfolk back you grew up in the 50s and 60s?
50s and 60s. Yeah. I graduated from high school in 66. Lived in an area called Larchmont, which is right behind Old Dominion, and spent an enormous amount of time on the playground, concrete baskets, fan-shaped metal backboards with metal rims, playing basketball with, spent a lot of time doing that, and never got very good at it. Never had a vertical leap, never really developed my left hand very well. But that was fun. It was just, life was much simpler, much easier. Nobody checking their phones between, games, and because they hadn't been invented yet. It was just a simpler world. And, had a really neat bunch of guys I hung out with, and we were all pretty big sports fans, but nobody was a great athlete, but we just enjoyed hanging around together.
Were you one of those kids that enjoyed playing and enjoyed watching your favorite college or professional team? Did you love the stats and some of the storylines? Did you love all of it?
Yeah, I read the sports page, and I did that from as early as I could read, because my father read the sports page, and, I just take it when he was done and read it. And, somewhere in there, I got this idea that I wanted to be a sports writer, and writing was not easy for me coming through school, and somewhere something clicked. And I think as an English teacher for all the years I did, I was trying to help guys get to that point where it clicked. But it was more just not being afraid to share a little bit of yourself out there, and take it. When I say take a chance with your writing, it doesn't mean do something crazy and use words that you shouldn't use, or big words when you could use a simpler word. But it just means don't be worried about what anybody says. Write from your heart. And somewhere that clicked in there. But, we used to go to basketball games at Old Dominion. I don't remember ever paying to get in one. We knew how to sneak in the back of the gym. And, there's a guy that coached at Norfolk Academy for many, many years. You probably played against him, named Dave Trickler. And he played for Hampden-Sydney back then. And, he was a little short guy, and we were the neighborhood urchins, and we yelled at him the whole game about being short. which is, very childish, very immature, but we thought it was clever. And it never occurred to me that one day this guy would be one of my best friends. And I told him that story, and he laughed about it, and I laughed about it, and I was embarrassed by it. But, we went to stuff. We were right down the street from Foreman Field, which has been completely reconfigured there. But, there's a local team back there in the 60s called the Norfolk Neptunes, the same league that the Richmond Rebels, Roadrunners, and all that were in. And they had a few players on the way up. They had a few has-beens and a few names. We had their football cards, and it was really cool to watch them practice and do all, be part of that beginning. If we'd had any social skills, we maybe could have gotten a date, but it was more just, squirrely guys liking sports and, maybe having a conversation with a girl and they had to go do their hair or something.
I would say it again.
I'm not joking about that. It's kind of the way it was. But anyway.
I'm taking every word you say as the truth, as I should, because I don't think you're telling me any tales here. I would argue, and I don't really remember, I was a little too young for this when he was in Virginia, but I would argue the best athlete to play in Virginia, if we could narrow it down to basketball, or we could just say all sports, Dr. J played professionally in the ABA for a Virginia team.
Yeah.
I don't remember where the team was. Were they out of Richmond or were they out of Norfolk?
They were out of Norfolk, Richmond, and Hampton, as I remember, Virginia Squires. And they came when I was at the News Leader, which was 70 to 72. And I saw them play. I never covered them, but I remember Julius Irving before he was Dr. J and thinking the guy's really good. And, that one wasn't hard to spot.
Yeah. If you're not picking up on that, you really don't understand basketball.
No, he could do some things out there that were pretty spectacular. And, the thing in that, when I look back to there, getting to know a guy like Paul Webb from up your way, I always thought he was just an icon. So nice to me as a young sports writer when he was at Randolph-Macon. And I took a team to team camp at Old Dominion back when he was there, a team from collegiate, and I would run into him at games. He and his son Eddie traveled all over and went to games all over the place. And every time I'd see him, he couldn't have been more gracious to me, call me by name. And, it's just, it wasn't just, perfunctory. It was real.
Yeah. Paul Webb was a legend when I was a kid. And we were sad to see him go to ODU, but he became a legend at ODU as well. And I recently got to know Eddie a little bit. I met Paul's youngest son, Doug. They of course they're biased. It's their dad, and as you know, he passed away fairly recently. Glowing what they say about him and the players that played for him. He had a massive impact on people. And those kind of coaches, those kinds of people, you're fortunate to get to know them.
Well, I think I know people that played for him back in the early days at Randolph-Macon that just considered him a father figure.
Yeah.
And, that's just some coaches are like that. And, would wonder, just as we at Collegiate talk about our icons, P.D. Jacobs, Grover Jones, those people that were there when the boys part of the school began, could they coach the modern athlete? And, I don't know. But they coached in the 60s, and I can't imagine a crazier time in the 70s. I can't imagine a crazier time to coach athletes when the world was pretty nutty back then.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, I remember the 70s. I don't really remember I was born in the 60s, but don't really remember it. Yeah. I don't know. It's, I guess every decade has its own set of challenges, and it's all about perspective and that.
Yeah.
All right. So let's transition to, you had mentioned you had an organ transplant. We briefly talked about it a few weeks ago, Weldon, but I'd love to hear a fuller story around that.
2009, I had a hip replacement, wore my hip out running, and did a pre-op physical, and some liver enzyme numbers were high. So they did the hip replacement and then did another check a couple of months later and said, you probably need to go talk to the people at the Hume Lee Transplant Center downtown. And, I was vaguely aware of organ transplants and but it was nothing, on the radar and nothing right in my face at the time. So I got to know them and they monitored me, and very, very long story short, they diagnosed an autoimmune liver disease called primary sclerosing cholangitis, which is basically the same disease that Walter Payton died from. And when I found that out, I thought, oh my gosh, if Walter Payton can't survive it, one of the greatest running backs in NFL history, how in the world am I going to get through this? But basically, it's a disease of the bile ducts that cause the bile ducts to scar, get inflamed, and the bile that goes through through your, the liver creates, and it goes through the bile ducts out your body the way things do. Because the bile ducts aren't clear, it backs up. So, they monitored PSC, and I've learned if a disease has initials, it's probably not a good thing. Oh. And as time went on, and this is a period of a year and a half or so, some of the symptoms, the classic symptoms, started to develop, and they were monitoring me with blood work pretty regularly. And the spring of that would have been, early in 2010, and toward the end of track season 2011, I was dragging. Fatigue is one of the symptoms of this, and I was on medication, and I'd take medication to control symptoms, and the side effects were not all that pleasant sometimes. But you do like you do anything else, it just stay optimistic, take one day at a time, and put one foot in front of the other. Well, things continued to get worse. And when school started in the fall of 2012, I knew that if I was I knew that I was either going to get a new liver or die before the school year was over. I mean, they were my options. And all I wanted to do was get through cross country season. I had a really good group coming back, and I wanted to coach them all the way through. And again, very, very long story short, we had a plan in place at Collegiate. If I couldn't finish the season, what would we do? If I couldn't step away from my teaching, what would we do? And I was getting checked really regularly, and they were talking transplant, and my numbers were getting higher and higher. And, it was the last Saturday, and either the last or the second to last Sunday in October of that year. I got up one morning, just, I told my wife, I've hit the wall, let's go to the ER. And they admitted me. And the next week they ran all the tests to see if my body would take a transplant. One of the interesting ironies of this, having a transplant, is you have to have an organ that's failing, but you have to have the rest of your body strong enough to be transplanted. Well, they did. They put me on the transplant list, and we live 20 minutes from VCU Medical Center, if the traffic's flowing smoothly. So they sent me home, and I spent basically a week in bed, just, trying to stay busy. I was writing the column for Collegiate, and just trying to. It's interesting. I'd get in touch with people and say, I want to get this done, but I got some health stuff, so I need you to call me back like by 2:00. I might not have the time. That got people's attention. So I, stayed busy, and then on election day of that year, went in to do labs, and my numbers were so bad that they admitted me to the intensive care unit. That was November 6th. November 8th, the doctor came in and informed me that I had a week if they couldn't, get the proper liver, get a compatible liver. And I took a week to mean 7 days. I found out later he really misspoke. He told me that, and he meant by the end of the week. So he told me that on a Thursday. So I'm sitting there thinking, wait a minute, I got 7 days. I'm thinking I got 7 days, but I really got 2. VCU, I was their poster child for organ transplants after that. They did a big ad campaign, and they had a very sad looking guy, that picture they got off the internet, sitting on the end of a jetty. And the line was, think you have important deadlines, try finding a liver in 6 days. But anyway, the day 6, again, I was at peace. I had done a lot of thinking about things. And, we have 4 children, 1 in each time zone. They had all been called home because, in 2 a.m. and November 14th, 2012, they came in, and, it wasn't like they had to call me. They knew where I was, but they came in, made sure I was awake. So when the phone rang and they said they have a liver and the transplant was that afternoon, they had to go to Wilmington, North Carolina to get it, and flew a team down there. And it's interesting, one of the doctors that was a first-year resident is now a trauma surgeon at VCU on the unit where I volunteer with transplant patients. And I run into him pretty regularly up there. And this is a dude that has literally seen my liver. So, so it was a photo finish, but, for me, it was a competition. And I remember thinking, I always thought it was about beating the Saints and beating Woodbury, beating Trinity, beating Benedictine. That was they were scrimmages. They were easy scrimmages getting me ready for this competition. And, I look back at it as a very uncomfortable situation. It was never a scary one. I was not intimidated by it. I think, I've really, when you're a transplant survivor, you live it every day because you got to take medication. And I'm thinking, was I just too dumb to realize how sick I was? Another thing I found through that whole thing was that it was the end of the cross country season. So I missed the league meet. I missed the state meet. But I can tell you, not literally, but figuratively, everybody was wearing green and gold. They were aware of it. And I've had one of the coaches reach out to me, text me the morning of the state meet and say, it's like we're having a family reunion. One of the brothers can't be here. That's a coach at Woodbury, Ben Hale. And I just, very heartwarming. So, it was just one of those challenges. And I think all the accumulated experiences along the way prepared me to deal with that. And, I don't regret any of it. I don't want to do any of it again. And I have had friends who've had to have multiple transplants, kidneys, livers, whatever. I don't want to do this again. But it's certainly challenged me to be better. And at the beginning, when I kind of knew what was going, I remember saying, this is a God-given gift that's challenging me to be who I want to be.
Yeah, I have lots of questions, Weldon. So I worked for a long time with a woman who had failing kidneys. She had pretty bad kidney disease, and I know secondhand her struggles to get a transplant. She eventually never got the transplant and passed too early, in my estimation. Is that true for like every organ? Is it like hit or miss? You may be on the list for years, or
I was on the list, I think, for like 14 or 16 days or so, because liver disease is measured in something called MELD score, MELD. And I remember that term. It means model for end stage liver disease. And I remember lying in the ICU bed toward the end there thinking, end stage. I think I know what we're talking about there. But it's based on some blood tests, and the highest they count is 40, and mine was 40 and rising. So because I was so sick, and, that's what catapulted me up higher on the list. Not that it was me by name, it was the guy in the computer that UNOS had to make the match with. And when a compatible liver, they did the computer work, and, it came up, not Weldon Bradshaw, but whatever the number was or the code was. And then once they realized that it would work or had a chance to work, that's when my name became part of it. It wasn't because I live in the West End. It wasn't because I had, I worked at Collegiate. It happened to do with, I was really, really sick, and this liver was compatible with me. The thing that was interesting about this was that the liver was 84 years old when I got it. And it was when they called me and said an 84-year-old woman died of a stroke. I didn't think that there, nothing struck me as anything unusual about that. It turned out to be the oldest liver ever to go into a patient with as high a MEL score as mine anywhere in the world at the time. And I really hope that record's been broken. But I had a surgeon named Dr. Robert A. Fisher, Bob Fisher, who was willing to take that chance. They don't like to be wrong. But Dr. Fisher, I think, trusted that if he could get me through November 14th, I'd prove him right. And I may be completely oversimplifying it. I may be romanticizing it, but it was definitely, a journey, an odyssey. And I've, again, don't regret any of it. Just sometimes you have to pinch yourself to realize that it actually happened.
Yeah, I mean, I'm floored when you said 84-year-old liver.
Yeah, it's 96 now. I've seen the surgery report, and if I did my math right, my liver was born on April 6, 1928. So my liver's lived through the Depression. It lived through World War II, and it's 20 years older than I am. So I've told them down there's still several nurses and a few doctors that are still there that took care of me. And I've said, hey, April 6, 2028, we're going to have a big party down there. We're going to celebrate my liver centennial. And I'm not joking about it. No, it's amazing. The liver numbers are really, really good. It's just the rest of me is 76 years old, and the 2 metal hips work fine, but some of the rest of it, I got some aches and pains, but nothing I can't manage.
Have you had any interest in talking to the 84-year-old's family?
Yes, I reached out in the immediate well, not the immediate. I gave it a few months and wrote letters, 3 of them. You don't know who they are. You write them through channels. They go to a clearinghouse, and it's up to the family to respond. And I would love nothing more than to get notice that somebody in Wilmington, North Carolina wants to see me. That hasn't come. My wife's take on it is she was elderly. Maybe there was no other family. My wife is probably right, but my take is sometimes there's some things you're not supposed to do. There are things you're not supposed to know. You're just supposed to do. And it became very clear to me in the aftermath of that my coaching time was winding down. I was getting older. A younger generation could do just fine. And maybe the coaching was supposed to continue in the form of being a volunteer down there. So that's what I do twice a week, and very, very meaningful. I've learned to, identify myself, give them enough information to get through the door, and then give them a chance to talk about what they want to talk about. And sometimes just venting is helpful. And if they don't want to talk, it's thank you, good meeting you, take care. And sometimes I'm in the room for 15, 20 minutes, but it's them directing the conversation. So, it's like going to the coach's clinic so you can learn how to run an inbounds play or do some track workout, except a little bit more intense.
Yeah. You mentioned 2 metal hips. My wife has had her hips replaced, and she's in her mid-50s. And when she was under anesthesia post-surgery, the surgeon came up to me and said, is your wife a runner? And I laughed because she's never really been a runner. But he said, look, if she is inspired to run, I would encourage you to get her to not run. Did you run after your hip replacements?
No.
Yeah. You basically can't, right?
Well, I after the first one in 2009, I told the doctor was a really good friend of mine. I said, I can run again, right? He said, actually, no, walk. I said, why can't I run? He said, walk. And, again, I'm 76 years old now. 76-year-old guys running don't look pretty anyway. So I've just found there's a lot of joy in walking, going out, taking a long walk. And, if I'd learned to cross train early, I probably would have both my original hips. But, Thankfully, I'm much more careful with the athletes that I coach than I ever was with myself.
Yeah. So in your mind, you got your hips replaced because it was the same motion repeating itself.
Yeah, genetically predisposed to arthritis, the doctor tells me too. So, it's life, and life isn't always smooth and easy and pretty. And I'm grateful that, there's such a thing as organ transplants. I'm trying to do honor to my donor, who, she was enlightened enough at 84 to check box. Really, a lot of people that age say, stuff's too old, nobody can use it. But she was enlightened enough to check a box, or her family in the moment of grief said, let's give it a go. And I look at it as she trusted me to take care, me, who she would never know, to take care of something she'd taken care of for 8.5 decades. And I'm trying to honor that trust.
Yeah. I mean, she's a bit of a hero, right? She could have very easily not decided to be an organ donor.
Well, she also had her stroke in church, and I originally heard that she died in church, but she couldn't have, because to donate solid organs, you have to be in a hospital, ventilated and all that. So my assumption is she had the stroke. They transported her to the hospital there. And when, it was determined that they couldn't, she would not get better, that's when they had to make some hard decisions. And, again, all I've been trying to do, it's very humbling, because, she didn't die for me. And I was, a lot of there's survivor's guilt involved with this. I knew, and I talked to patients about this when they articulate it. I knew, lying in the ICU bed, there was no way I was going to get out of the hospital without somebody dying somewhere. And then I thought, I might be insensitive, but I can't do anything about that. I can only take care of the guy in the bed and keep strong for my family, who's sitting out in the waiting room and scared to death. And, and if this does come to pass, I'm going to do the best I can to honor this gift. And so I hope whoever she is, some way, in some spiritual or some cosmic way, I've made her proud. I hope so.
Yeah. I mean, she indirectly, unknowingly saved your life. And that stays with you the rest of your life, right?
Well, anybody who isn't, any transplant survivor who is not incredibly grateful, I would worry about them. I really would. But most that I have met, it's, the gratitude is there. And the key is, keeping it going. It's a lifelong thing. But I just hope it's not me saying every day, thank you. It's me just trying to take care of this liver the best I can.
Well, and the volunteer work you do twice a week at VCU is part of your paying it forward, paying it back, however you want to think about it.
Yeah. Well, it's, one of the things that I have always done with track is teach relay handoffs in the 4x8, 4x4. And years ago, when I was much more involved with it than I was now, I saw, where you could get gold batons, not gold, but gold colored batons. So I talked to my AD, said, can I order a box of these? It'll last like 10 years. I'll take good care of them. And so he said, yeah. So whenever we'd run the championship meet, we'd run with a gold baton. And it got, as time evolved, I got thinking, what there's more to it than this. And, English teacher probably overthink things. But what teach kids now, try to teach them, is that when you're running the relay, it's not so much the gold baton for first place. Relay handoffs are about timing. It's about footwork. It's about foot position, arm angle, all this stuff. But what it's really about is giving your best to the next person. So what I've tried to get across, and, they listen pretty well to this, is what we should be doing in life. Just as we're handing a gold baton to the next person, we should be giving the gold that we have, not so much in our wallet, but in our heart, to the next person. And if everybody did that, the world would be great. So the handoff to me is more a metaphor for life than probably anything that I've ever coached along the way.
Caring about your fellow man, fellow woman. Yeah. You mentioned 4 children. Weldon, tell me about your kids.
My wife and I have been married almost 38 years. We came into the marriage. Both of us had been married before, and she was a 3rd grade teacher at collegiate. We met at the faculty picnic, 1985, planning never to get involved again because, going through a divorce is not easy. And a year later, we got married, and it's been incredible. But the children were all elementary or middle school. They range in age from 44 to 50, almost 51 now. And we have one in each time zone, and they are, great adults. And I'm very close to my stepdaughter, and we have 5 grandchildren ranging in age from 5 to almost 21. The 2 oldest are in college, and 2 cousins, one in Colorado, one in Richmond, going into high school next year, and the 5-year-old going to kindergarten. And she may be the most excited of all about all of it.
Well, you mentioned 4 time zones. Where are they specifically?
Say that again. I have a son here, Dave, who lives in Midlothian, and my son Jay lives in Pensacola, Florida. Dave here has a 14-year-old and a 5-year-old, separate marriages there. And Jay has daughters, 19, is rising sophomore at Ole Miss. Son is almost 21, rising junior at South Alabama. And then have a stepdaughter that lives in Boulder. She has a 9th grade son, rising 9th grade son. Have a stepdaughter that lives in Los Angeles. That is, she does a job. She would have figured this technology stuff out. She works remotely, and she's an HR person. And anytime I need tech support, she can always figure it out for me without even having to look at it. She can just talk me through it.
Yeah, I was going to say all 4 of them have picked decently warm climates, except for maybe the Colorado.
Yeah, Colorado can get pretty cold, but their hot is not our hot. Their hot is a very dry 90 degrees, as opposed to our hot being a very humid 90 degrees.
Yeah, I'd rather be 90 and no humidity than 80 and 90% humidity.
Yeah. They're in good places. They're happy where they are. We joked along the way that we raised our children to be independent and self-sufficient. Maybe we did too good a job of it, because it would be nice to. The last time we had them all together was in November of 2012 when I was really sick. I mean, we with them, but they're having everybody together at the Thanksgiving table it just doesn't happen because of their, they living their lives, but they're also very close to us.
Yeah, they're living their lives, but they have in-laws, and those in-laws want to see their kids. Yeah. But you need to get on the family reunion thing, maybe, Weldon, like every couple of years. Doesn't happen.
If we can get everybody to stay put, I don't know, but I don't know. We've talked about it, but I don't know.
All right. Well, hey, we're at 58 minutes, Weldon. I appreciate you doing this. I really do. You've lived an incredible life. I would say one word that pops into my mind, and this is based on what we're talking about, but it's also based on sort of the vibe I'm picking up, is you've lived a fulfilling life. Would you agree with that?
I really, I do. I mean, it sounds somewhat boastful to say that, but I say it humbly. I mean, I've been able to, have a vocation and an avocation that I've loved. My wife has been incredibly tolerant of all of it. And, she was a 3rd grade teacher for 36 years, 30 of them at collegiate. We shared that journey. She's retired now, but, it's not easy all the time. A lot of roller coaster, but as you retire, you do have a little bit more time, and you can reflect. And it's like, hey, it's been a pretty good ride here, So fulfilling, yes. Meaningful, yes. And some great people I've met along the way.
Yeah. When I say fulfilling, I'm not thinking it's certainly leaning towards the positive very strongly, but you also have to go through some turmoil and some challenges in your life to get.
But you don't get better unless you do. And I mean, that again, very cliche. And, I think the thing that's very important to mention here, the newspaper stuff I do, I live in the world at Collegiate, but the newspaper stuff is so enriching to me because I meet people that, it's a different world that I am, where I am there in many of the places, but everybody, no matter where I go, makes me feel very welcome. And the connections, the relationships, the friendships I've developed with coaches and athletes all around is, that's meaningful. That's fulfilling to me.
This is going to be a strange question. I was actually going to close, but I'm going to ask this question anyway. Is it because sports sort of pulls people that are like that into it, or does sports actually help them become that sort of person, or is it the fact that you live in Virginia, which is clearly the best state in the union, or is it some mix of the three?
Well, I think the combination of the first two really is it. I think my family in Colorado would tell you Colorado's the best place to live, and certainly the ones in Florida until hurricanes come through.
Right.
But I don't know. It's just I just feel like I've been very blessed. The hips, the knee, the liver, all that. I mean, it's staying positive. It's it's tough. I mean, I almost died. That's no joke. But I look at it as a blessing to have the challenge, and it's great to have gotten through it. But I also grew a lot in the process. And if you ever stop growing, whether you're a kid that we're coaching or you're 76 years old like I am, you got to continue to grow, and you got to continue to learn, and be enriched by those around you, whether they look like you or whether they're different, and be tolerant of each other. I wish the world was more like that. Yeah,
it's weird that the world's not more like that.
Well,
but you find your people along the way that are like that, and you cherish them, right?
And I think the important thing is you find the right mentors, and I certainly have done that both at Collegiate, at the newspaper, and just the Coach Webb that I've got to know along the way, and you learn from the experienced people, the people that have been there and done that, and it doesn't mean you got to do things exactly like they did it. And my mom and dad certainly. I mean, they're again both deceased now, but the voices are always there, and as I've dealt with challenge and stuff along the way, what would they do? I mean, they came through some times pretty tough too.
Oh boy, did they? Yeah,
we sure did.
Well, cool. Well, thanks for doing this. I really appreciate it. And I hope all four of your kids listen to this and enjoy
it. Well, thanks for the opportunity, Paul. And I really appreciate your having the confidence in me that it was worth doing this. So
no, absolutely. I enjoyed learning a lot more about you.
Thank you. Take care.
You too.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to wherever you listen to podcasts. We'd also really appreciate if you'd rate and review us. You can find us at scodupodcast.com.